Hi and welcome back to Assessing Achievement with the ELL in mind. In our last lesson, we took a look at some common and useful considerations for assessing ELLs in both their content mastery and language development. In this lesson, we're going to provide you with an assessment accommodation, what not to do list. In this lesson, we will cover some common accommodation pitfalls to avoid and provide you with some simple solutions on how to avoid them and how to create a more positive learning environment in its place. Let's take a look at some of the common assessment pitfalls to avoid. The first pitfall is to only rely on defining unfamiliar words as an accommodation. The student will often need more than the definition of a new word to access the input required of an assessment and then produce the required language for demonstration of the knowledge. The second common assessment pitfall to avoid is excusing ELLs from the assessment. We need information about ELLs learning, and we want to be able to provide them with the same opportunities that come from assessment as all other students. They must always be a part of assessment, even if the assessment itself is a very modified version. The third common pitfall is to solely allow for more time on a test without other accommodations. While it is important to provide extra time in some cases, we don't want that to be the only accommodation offered to our ELLs. The next pitfall is to provide content obligatory language that was taught during the lesson. In this case, we would expect that our ELLs actually learned this content obligatory vocabulary and thus be able to use it. So by providing them with a definition of these words or with these words themselves, we're actually not getting a clear picture of the content mastered within that lesson. The final assessment pitfall to avoid is to translate the test or allow the use of translators. While sometimes it is tempting to translate into the first language for the student, we really want to make sure that we are assessing in the language that the instruction was originally provided. So let's take a look at some solutions. Instead of relying on defining unfamiliar words as an accommodation, we can provide graphics to help support these unfamiliar words. We can use more simplified vocabulary or content-compatible vocabulary to support the more difficult and unfamiliar words. And finally, we can teach any unnecessary unfamiliar words prior to the assessment in hopes that our student will be able to draw from them during the assessment. The next pitfall, do not excuse ELLs from assessment, can also be remedied with some quick and easy solutions. The first is to set clear objectives and criteria for language development and content learning. This will help your ELLs focus on what it is they should master and what they are intended to learn, and will help you with creating and grading assessments. Instead of excusing them, you can apply appropriate accommodations and modifications as discussed throughout this course. And you can provide multiple opportunities for ELLs to demonstrate knowledge in both formative and summative assessment types, rather than just excusing them. Instead of solely allowing more time on the test without other accommodations, use the extra time allowance strategically, especially when you provide students with extensive reading or writing tasks. You can simplify language tasks so they don't require such heavy amounts of time. And finally, provide accommodations such as graphic organizers or writing frames that allow students to demonstrate content mastery without extensive reading or writing, which obviously takes more time. The next pitfall, do not provide or define content obligatory language that was taught during the lesson, can be avoided by making use of lesson planning and activity strategies that support the learning of content obligatory vocabulary before the assessment itself and during the lessons. We can be flexible with content-compatible vocabulary options and accept and allow students to use content-compatible vocabulary to describe similar thoughts, procedures, or analysis. We can provide visuals for basic learners to help them access and use the content obligatory vocabulary. Finally, do not translate the test or allow for the use of translators, but instead apply accommodations as discussed in this course. Reduce language demands, and adjust objectives and criteria for the language level of your ELL. Assessment should always be administered in the language of instruction. In identifying some of these pitfalls and providing you with solutions, we hope that you are able to apply these to your own assessment and make sure that the integrity of your assessment is upheld at all times.